possiamo fare in italiano.
Ok.
Faccio un'eccezione.
Grazie.
Una piccola eccezione
Grazie.
per te.
Ti amerò per tutta la vita.
Italian Wine Podcast. Chin Chin with Italian Wine People.
Welcome to a new installment of On the Road Edition hosted by Stevie Kim. Today Stevie visits Benvenuto Brunello, the anteprima event for the newly released 2018 vintage and 2017 Reserva wines of the Brunello Consortium. Stevie had the opportunity to talk to a variety of guests, including the president of the consortium, masters of wine, experts and producers from Montalcino, discussing the new trends in Brunello and the future of the Italian wine market in general.
Okay, so here we are. We are here at Benvenuto Brunello 2022. Most of us are tasting the 2018 vintage. And look who I found. Lin Lu from our VIA community.
Ciao.
She's of course the first female Chinese master of wine. And she did the course with us 2016, the second edition.
Yes, indeed.
Yep. So how many wines have you tasted?
About 130 in 1.5 days.
Right.
And tomorrow, I think we will continue to taste a bit more.
So can you give us kind of an overall view of your thoughts on the 2018 vintage?
I think 18 is a very elegant vintage overall. It's, some of the samples are very accessible already. And does have this kind of freshness and fragrance in many of the great examples. And I also believe it's a vintage of showing the capacity of the wineries, vigneron. So it's a very interesting vintage.
So listen, Lynn, I know you don't have a crystal ball, right, in front of you, but what do you think is going to happen in China, but with specifically focused on wine business in China? How do you see this playing onward?
I think it's getting more positive. So the travel will be going back again to normal, whatever normality means. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of time. I don't think it will be too long because their controls are getting more relaxed. And
So in terms of wine preferences and also some, I would say, governmentally facilitated consumption, they're pushing really the Chinese wines now, from what I understand. Is that fair to say?
The government always is behind the Chinese thing. So, but then it's dependent on the trade and the consumers. I wouldn't say one thing is taking over the other. Rather, it's a very positive sign if there are very good quality Chinese wines are coming up, and it's cultivating the audience to be more inclined to consume wines. So I think generally it's a very good positive sign.
So before we go, I would like for you to gift us with free advice to our audience, and especially the Italian wine producers. Okay, how can they better promote Italian wine in China?
The Chinese market is very fragmented, and there are all kinds of consumers, but you don't need to change too much to adapt to that, but you do need to have certain understanding about the subculture, the cultural difference between region to region, because like Shanghai is definitely not the same as Beijing, for instance. I did a business conference in June. Mm-hmm. It's about doing wine business in China. So I invited lots of sommeliers, journalists.
Where did you do this conference?
So we did it online.
Okay.
And the whole idea when I organize this, it's really to help the producer to tackle Chinese market, not just something only relevant to them as a very superficial way, but it's showing the global picture of China.
Okay, so it's a wrap from Benvenuto Brunello, and so we'll be looking forward to hosting Lin Lu into Italy, Italian wine, back again. We need to get her back so that she can help us promote Italian wine. Chin Chin with Italian wine people. Ciao ragazzi. Cheers.
Thank you. Chin Chin.
We're back. Benvenuto Brunello 2022, and I am here with NIKLAS BERGQVIST. So, of course, he's our Italian wine expert from the VIA community, which means he's not just an ambassador, he is the top level, the top tier. He knows a little bit more than the ambassadors, maybe a lot more. In fact, he just told me the good news that he's in the MW program and he passed the practical bit. So congratulations, NIKLAS.
Thank you, Stevie.
Okay, so we want to just share your thoughts about the Brunello 2018 vintage. Before that, can you tell our audience what you do in the wine world?
I am from Sweden, Stockholm,
Yes.
and my main job is in wine collectors club, a cellar called Grape in central Stockholm. And I also work with sommelier education and do a little bit of wine writing for a newsletter and wine magazine and so on.
Okay, great.
things.
He told me he tasted the entire battery of 2018 vintage. How many wines were there?
I think we were up at about 260 wines all in all, but that's including the 17 Reservas and some of the Rossos and so on. So it's a lot of wine.
Can you give us your opinion about the 2018 vintage?
It's a very interesting vintage. It's quite warm, but I think it translates into a certain elegance in the wines, especially the producers that have really gotten the vintage style right. Nice fresh acidity, and some wines a little bit more evolved and that will be nice to drink when they're young. Some of the wines a little bit tighter and in need of some years in the cellar.
Are you familiar with the other recent vintages, like the 17, 16,
Yeah, absolutely.
15?
Yeah, absolutely.
So can you compare those vintages from 15 onward?
15 onward, this is definitely a lighter and fresher style. The wines are in many cases not as structured as the 16s. They are not going to be. Some of the wines will have a very long life ahead, but especially as compared with the 15s and the 17s, they are definitely lighter, more perfumed, and they have such different styles. And I really see for a lot of people the 17s are going to be a more interesting vintage because it's much richer and the wines are much rounder, whereas with the 18s they will appeal to people that are into a totally different style of wine that is lighter, fresher.
NIKLAS, tell us, I'm really curious about the Wine Collectors Club. What is it called in Swedish?
It's Vinkällaren Grapp.
Vinkällaren Grape. Okay, so tell us what that is all about. How do Italian wines fall into the category of the, I don't know, the most requested?
The wine club was started out in 1986, and at that time, wines for aging and investment, it was almost only about French wines. There were a few Italian wines around, and with the last few years, Italian part has definitely become much more important. One time it used to be all about Amarone, in one time it used to be all about Super Tuscans. For the moment, it is a lot about Brunello, and of course Barolo and Barbaresco is, I would say, are the most popular styles at the moment.
What about whites?
No, unfortunately.
In terms of investment, collector's item, no Italian white wines?
I would say in general, very, very few Italian white wines.
Because we were in Piemonte and a very, very famous, iconic producer has said that the future of Italian wine are the white wines. What do you think about that?
I think there are a lot of fabulous white wines in Italy. At the moment, it's very much about the red wines, and I think for most Swedish people, it would be very hard to believe that Italy actually produces more white wine than red wine.
And what are some of the wine trends in Sweden right now?
For the restaurant market, I would say that it's still very, very much about the classic regions, still very much about France and Italy, but also to some extent less classic or revived parts of Europe like Eastern Europe, a lot about natural wines.
What are some of the tips you can give the Italian wine producers, how they can better promote Italian wine in Sweden?
That's a very big question. No, but I think, I mean, that's very, very dependent on what style of wine that you produce. And I think probably if you are a small producer making a style of wine that's not very internationally known, then I think it would be a very good thing to try to cooperate with a wine importer that is mainly working towards the restaurant business, but because I think if you don't have a huge volume of wine to sell, if you get the wine to the right importer, they will be able to convince the sommeliers of the quality of that wine. And I know that there is a lot of Italian wines are very, very high quality, but that are hard to sell just because people don't know the varieties and the regions. So it's easier to start a trend in the restaurant market rather than in the monopoly.
Okay. All right, that's it. It's a wrap from Benvenuto Brunello 2022 edition for the 2018 vintage. Chin Chin with Italian wine people. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hello everybody, my name's Stevie Kim and we are back. I ran into somebody very special today. His name is Brunello CUCINELLI.
Yes.
È tuo nome, giusto?
Brunello.
Sì, Brunello. And he's a very, of course, iconic designer and a personality. But now, get this, he has also become a wine producer. So we're going to talk to him not about fashion, not about design, not about saving the world, but just about wine. Benvenuto nel mondo del vino, allora.
Grazie. Sì, io vi parlo in italiano perché il mio inglese non mi consente di parlarvi con l'anima. Ma io vivo in questo piccolo borgo del 1300, in Solomeo, vicino a Perugia, è un piccolissimo borgo dove abbiamo l'azienda. Poi un po' di anni fa facemmo dell'olio, quindi volevo con questo olio e vino dare dignità alla terra. Questo è il mio sogno.
Però raccontaci un po' del tuo vino, che cos'è, come è fatto?
Facciamo solo un rosso.
Un rosso, quindi un vino solo?
Sì, un vino solo che si chiama Castello di Solomeo, facciamo solo 8.000-9.000 bottiglie e l'abbiamo fatto con questo taglio un po' bordelais, se l'abbiamo presentato 3 giorni fa a Milano, pare che sia buono. Pare, ma l'obiettivo di fondo è dare dignità alla terra con un buon prodotto. Volevo fare un Made in Italy di grande artigianalità che si lascia in eredità.
Perché vino e non lo so, la birra?
No, vabbè.
Non lo so.
Beh, diciamo che in questo borgo, questo piccolo borgo del 1300, fino a 50 anni fa era un borgo che producevano grano, olio e vino.
Ah, ok, quindi c'è lo storico.
Poi siamo arrivati noi, perché il borgo era diciamo disabitato, abbiamo iniziato a restaurare e siamo messi a produrre cashmere. Quindi è chiaro che dopo la produzione di cashmere abbiamo provato a riprodurre grano, olio, vino, frutteti, tutta questa roba ci serve per il ristorante dell'azienda.
Allora tu appena mi hai visto per la prima volta mi hai messo già a posto il cappellino. Nel tuo diciamo anima tu vedi comunque la forma, ok?
Ogni essere umano sapete che si giudica in 6-7 secondi, no? Quando ci si vede e la forma ha un grande valore. Io ti ho vista con questo cappellino molto carino a cena e mi hai subito dato un'impressione amabile.
Sì, per mettere a posto.
Sì, sostituite la paura con la speranza.
I think that's a good conclusion to this small, tiny interview with a new winemaker. His name is Brunello CUCINELLI, and that's it. It's a wrap, Chin Chin with Italian wine people. Ciao ragazzi.
Ciao, grazie, arrivederci.
Ciao. Ciao ragazzi, welcome back to Benvenuto Brunello 2022 edition. Ciao Susan.
Ciao, ciao.
Susan Hulme. How do you say your last name?
Hume, that's right, yeah.
She's Susan Hulme. Of course, she's a master of wine. So tell us a little bit about your experience for the 2018 vintages. How many wines have you tasted first?
I think I've tasted about 140 now. Over 2 days, 2 solid days. I don't like to taste too fast, actually. I take my time over them because I want to write detailed notes and I want to give the wines a chance to open up.
So can you just give us your general remarks, an overview of the 2018 vintage?
Well, it is obviously a lighter vintage. It's less concentrated, and you feel that lack of concentration in the middle of the wines mostly. On the other hand, it's quite pretty vintage. It's accessible, first of all, and I think you can see the people who've done a really great job, and so you've got wines that are very kind of harmonious now and drinkable quite soon.
Can you share with us any of your favorites?
Well, I like Gianni Brunelli because it's such a pure, it's not smothered in oak, it has a lot of purity. Masrani is very kind of a style that I like, Sally Cuti was in this year, and their wines were beautiful. And also Sampolino, especially their cru I loved a lot, Helicrisium. So there were a lot actually, and some quite different styles. Licini is also really beautifully made wine.
The 2018 vintage, which is a lighter, more fresh vintage, do you think it will appeal to the UK wine market or less so than the previous vintages?
I think this is a vintage that will appeal to people, yes, because people want to try Brunello. They maybe have a misconception about Brunello for a lot of people as very hard tannic wines that you need to wait for 10 years or 15 years. And actually, Italian wines in general have changed and developed. Even in the last 4 or 5 years, the tannins have become much finer. People know so much more. The vineyards have come of age. There's much more fine-tuning in the vineyards, and there's much more understanding of not extracting too much, less oak. And so these wines are really enjoyable sooner and earlier. And I think people will love this vintage for that reason.
So, you know, in the recent past, 2 things happened. Of course, the pandemic, but also Brexit. So in terms of the UK wine market, how has this affected the wine consumption or wine trends in general, or wine business?
In terms of the pandemic, people drank more than ever because they were at home. For example, 2 years ago, something like that, we were the biggest market for Prosecco. And then there's the fine wine end. We've always had these different layers, you know, there's the niche end, the connoisseur end, or the sort of passionate expert, if you like. And at the other end, there's people who just want something enjoyable, inexpensive, and, you know, easy to drink. And I think Italy can do both things really well.
It's easier for me to ship wines to New Zealand, samples even, than the UK. There are various obstacles, added obstacles for me to do business with the UK. Having said that, what do you think, what do you see as kind of the wine trends in terms of, or even just for yourself personally?
Well, I think generally people
in the grand scheme of things,
people love rosés are still very popular. Rosé. I mean, Prosecco Rosato is a big thing.
Yeah.
It's a big thing. I think that then there are the classics. You know, there's always going to be a strong market for things like Brunello and Chianti, of course, Chianti Classico, all the classic names, Barolo, Barbaresco. Sicily, Etna is very trendy because of their cool mountain qualities. So I think so many, maybe white wines are going to increase and grow.
So I'm just coming back from Barbaresco myself, and a very famous wine producer said the future for Italian wine is actually the white wine. So I think that was very interesting insight, that a notion that I'm taking home away with me today. So thank you very much, Susan, for joining us, and hope to have you by our side, Vinitaly and 5-star wines or whatever, if you can make it and join us again. Chin chin, cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, so that's a wrap. Chin chin with Italian wine people. Ciao ragazzi. Ciao Fabrizio. His name is Fabrizio Bindocci, and the president of the Consortium, but also he's a wine producer, il Poggione. Allora, tu hai 2 cappelli, uno il produttore del vino e l'altro presidente del consorzio. Spiegaci al nostro, diciamo, audience che cos'è Benvenuto Brunello, come se nessuno avesse mai sentito nominare.
Benvenuto Brunello è l'evento più importante del consorzio, perché in questo Ma in momento, in questa manifestazione, presentiamo al pubblico, ai giornalisti, ai Master of Wine, al trade, le annate che a gennaio usciranno in commercio. Presentiamo in anteprima quello che dal 1° di gennaio saranno presenti sugli scaffali di tutto il mondo.
Allora, dammi qualche numero, no? Quindi quanti produttori ci sono, quanti ospiti ci sono, quanti giorni sono.
Abbiamo iniziato l'11 di novembre a presentare i vini alla stampa, al trade e al Master of Wine. Proseguiremo poi, domani inizieranno a venire ad degustare gli chef stellati e poi proseguiremo con altri, compreso il Brunello Lover. 137 produttori presenti all'evento su 240 produttori soci del consorzio. Quest'anno il vostro lavoro è stato anche quello di portare a Montalcino un pubblico selezionato. Noi abbiamo bisogno di queste persone, pur vendendo in tutto il mondo oltre 9 milioni di bottiglie di Brunello all'anno.
Noi senz'altro tramite Veneto International Academy faremo la nostra parte, abbiamo una piccola delegazione qui del nostro community e soprattutto il Consorzio di Brunello è il nostro nuovo supporter per il Veneto International Academy, che vale a dire che faremo un grande masterclass durante la prossima edizione di Veneto International Academy a Verona e poi a breve, diciamo, speriamo di organizzare qualche altra gita scolastica dedicata ai nostri ambasciatori. Come consuetudine lo facciamo quando noi apportiamo anche un supporter nuovo, quindi questo senz'altro ci aiuterà. Fabrizio, raccontaci un po', dacci un breve resoconto del un po' il feedback che hai avuto da questa annata 2018.
Quello che stanno dicendo i giornalisti che hanno degustato il vino, l'annata 2018 è un'annata meno impegnativa, più piacevole da bere, vini anche più pronti, meno strutturati, comunque con una buona acidità e abbiamo avuto un bel riscontro da parte della critica. La riserva 2017 era stata comunque un'annata non facile perché avevamo avuto comunque un periodo estivo abbastanza caldo e siccitoso, però poi i vini che sono nati dalla vendemmia sono vini, per chi ha fatto la riserva, vini importanti che sicuramente daranno grandi soddisfazione ai produttori. Per ultimo il rosso di Montalcino 2021, il rosso è un vino più facile, meno impegnativo, è un vino anche che abitua le persone a conoscere il Sangiovese, le prepara poi al passaggio successivo che è quello di acquistare e bere il Brunello.
Ok. So that's a wrap. Chin chin with Italian wine people. Ciao ragazzi! So we get to interview this gentleman sitting right next to me. His name is Leonardo Bellaccini. He mostly likes to go on his horse, but sometimes he makes wine. Okay, so tell us what you do. Tell our audience who you are.
Well, it's a long story. I mean, I did 39 vintage, so...
What is the name of your winery?
Well, I work for San Felice Winery, which is located in Chianti, Classico, close to Siena. Since 1980 we own Campo Giovanni, which is a beautiful winery in the southwest side of the Montalcino Hill. And recently we also bought a winery in Bulgaria, Bellaia. 3 wineries, all in Tuscany.
And you're managing all of them?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the Brunello, the 2018 vintage.
Very challenging. especially in Montalcino. I don't ask me why, because I don't have the answer. But at the very beginning, both in Chianti and here in Montalcino, for Sangiovese, I thought, well, that is almost a bad vintage. Then in spring, I realized that some of the wine start to turn a little better than what I supposed, but still Brunello was still, I wasn't really convinced. So I did the blend 1 year ago, wait 1 month, revisit, tasting again with friends, with colleagues. Well, at the end, also the Brunello really recovered, and is a vintage that put together a part of the new era with the global warming, but a part that bring you back to the vintage of the 80s or early 90s, when the wine has light color, very gentle in the mouth. So it's totally a different style, but at the end, now is several months that is in bottles, I'm really comfortable with the quality of Campo Giovanni 2018.
And where are you selling your Brunellos? Which markets?
The easiest market would be
US.
US, but we try to be very balanced in the sales. 2 markets make 50% of our production, so Italy and US, approximately 25, and then Canada. And then our third export market used to be Russia.
And what about China?
Well, now is almost impossible. But also pre-COVID was very up and down. In Asia, the biggest market for us is Korea.
Korea is growing, right?
Yes, it's
During
growing.
the pandemic, it's growing
Yes.
like crazy. So what about the UK market? There's so many things happening in the recent past.
Now, recently, in Europe is our best market. So
In the UK?
UK.
Even after the Brexit?
yes.
That's interesting.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you one last question. What about the harvest this year? How was the harvest in 2022?
The quality has been tremendous. The heat and the drought affect much more than, for instance, 2017, the quantity, the yield. So the skin were ripe. The wine are very well balanced.
So it's promising. The yield is smaller, much smaller. How much? 30% less?
30 in Chianti, 35 here.
Wow. So what are you going to do? You're going to raise the price?
This year, in 2023, we are going to raise the price for other reasons that you can imagine. Economics, so everything is
More expensive?
Yes. We don't know what we will do with the 22 Brunello we will release in 5 years, but for sure we have no other options because, you know, we are always out of stock. When we produce, our maximum production is close to 100,000 bottles. This year they will be 60, 65.
Oh my goodness. All right, so on this positive note, we're going to wrap it up and say goodbye to Leonardo Bellaccini. He has to go home. Thank you for joining us. Ciao ragazzi! Join us next time.
Grazie.
And that's a wrap. Tune in next time for more fascinating stories from the world of wine. Are you thirsty for more Italian wine treasures? Go to ItalianWinePodcast.com or find us on SoundCloud, Himalaya, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. Don't forget to subscribe and like all our channels. Chin chin, and thanks for listening.